And many people live in this lost zone, or live most of their lives confined within the consequences of choices they made to avoid time in the land of the lost. But again, could it be the way we are looking at it that makes it seem sad? Do we gain more out of this path than we lose? What is the journey of the never lost self versus the journey of the lost self found? On Stories of Self, we go on journeys into the lives of ourselves and others. We see how stories connect, how they diverge, and how we can create our worlds and solve our problems. This is the real-life remix of storytelling, which is so often stranger than fiction. So come and sit round the fire, chill by the ocean, or get a coffee with me, as I delve into the stories of self that make, break, and remake us. Some stories are dramatic, some are serene, some will magically mirror you, and some will be delightfully different. I'm your host, Katie Reeve Arnold, and this is Stories of Self. Have you ever felt lost? A little lost? Completely lost? Lost in a specific way or in relation to a certain element of life? Maybe work was going well, but you were lost in relationships. Or your friendships were great, but you were lost in your career direction. I have often felt elements of my life were a bit lost. I was excelling at some things, but others were a mystery to me. Despite looking around me to see how others were being successful in those areas and seeing them being successful in those areas, I would look at them and try to work out how they were doing it and how I was going so wrong. The lost feeling has also often flexed and moved between different aspects of my life. Sometimes one aspect can be going so well one year or 1 month, but the next year or next month, I'm totally adrift and no land is in sight in that aspect of my existence. And sometimes I've felt so lost that it hasn't just been one area of my life that's been affected, not even just a few areas of life, but instead it has taken over everything, where I've been lost to the point that nothing seemed to be going right, and I was completely without confidence in my direction. And that statement, things going right or going wrong, also sometimes didn't align with how I felt. There were times when it seemed outwardly like everything was going right for me and I was on a desirable trajectory. But inside, it was a different story, and I was disconnected from that external image and, in truth, I felt even more lost now, because now I wasn't just lost, I was an ungrateful idiot who couldn't see or value where they had it good. So now I was lost and putting myself down for feeling like that. I think the reality of it is that we all feel lost sometimes. And the extent of that feeling and how it impacts our lives ebbs and flows like the tides. Sometimes it has a huge impact and sometimes less so. But I find that lost feeling can always come back. No matter what I do, I can't seem to get rid of it totally. But now I am wondering, should I get rid of it totally? Do I really want to? Or does that lost feeling, whether big or small, have a purpose? Feeling lost sent us searching and questioning. What is wrong? What is wrong and what is missing, and how can we find it? In that way, the lost feeling inspires chosen change. It is a subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, pain that prods and pokes us forward to search, to grow, to change, to evolve who we are. And it does it before circumstance has to come in to do so, like a boot to our backs. If change and personal growth is standing at the plane door with the parachute on, then feeling lost is a voice beside us, encouraging us to find the strength to make the jump we want to. While if we repeatedly ignore that lost feeling and refuse to listen to the feeling lost's voice, then pain is waiting there to come into play with its friend frustration, and they will just throw us out of the metaphorical plane door. They will force a change, and we bend to their will. They force change either in our lives, or if we refuse to change in our lives, then they force a change in who we are being, creating compounding, painful dissonance or distance between who we are being and who we truly are, as we lock more of us into our shadow to avoid choosing change. I was chatting with my sister the other day, and she commented on how happy, full of life, authentic, and truly being her my niece was. And how this was really such a joy to see a child just being themselves with love and with joy and with authenticity. Her uniqueness was radiating through, and far from being afraid to show that, she was delighting in it. We commented how challenging it was then that these pure and true little individuals, children, had to go through losing that certainty of who they are, had to lose their connection to that naturalness and authenticity of just letting who you are shine. As we go out into the world, it happens to us all. At some point, sooner or later, we are challenged in who we are told we are meant to be. Not because we are hurting anyone, but because we don't fit in with certain groups of other people or the systems that have been created to make society work in ways previously chosen. We lose our connection with just being, and we start to ask how we should be. We ask others, we look around for answers, and we learn to question ourselves before being ourselves, and then to allow or cultivate certain ways of being and hide others. This can all sound quite sad, especially when you take into account that it almost universally happens to some extent or other to everyone, and many people live in this lost zone, or live most of their lives confined within the consequences of choices they made to avoid time in the land of the lost. But again, could it be the way we are looking at it that makes it seem sad? Do we gain more out of this path than we lose? What is the journey of the never lost self versus the journey of the lost self found? The never lost self is how we start. Everything is simple, everything is clear. Often the range of options we have seems limited, but we choose from them without question. Often we are compliant and happy to adapt who we are, to fit in, to belong, to be accepted within the bigger society. And this is where it starts, because the more we adapt who we are being, the more the gap begins to open up. A gap starts and begins to really open between who we truly are and who we are living as in our lives. For some people, this gap is just a tiny space. For some, it is a mind the gap between the train and the platform kind of space. But for some, it becomes the Grand Canyon. It's different for all of us. We push away parts of who we are that we decided cannot be accepted by society and authority figures, by family, by loved ones, by ourselves. We push them so far that the gap starts to open between where they now exist unrealized, no longer reflected in who we are being in our lives, and between the us we have kept, the us that belongs to this life we have. And depending on how much we push across, away from the light of our days and the lives we live today, and into the shadowlands, the gap grows. The more we push across, the wider it gets. And in that gap, the lost self forms. The lost self is often initially very quiet. You might not even notice it there. After all, there is a lot going on. A lot is new as we progress through childhood and school and into early adulthood. We are busy with new challenges often, sometimes daily, as we go through the earlier phases of our life. It is only if we've created a more extreme gap between who our shadow self pushed away on the other side is and who we are being, that the lost self is visible to us in childhood or in our young adult life. And even then, we are busy, we push it away, confused and repeating the only trick we once knew, the one that initiated the formation of the gap to start with. We blame ourselves and look to see how we can change the one thing we have control over as children, our inner world. Effectively, we force the fact that we have noticed the gap over the gap. The sheer noticing and awareness, even perhaps our very capacity to be with what is, We shove it over the widening gap into the shadowlands and into our shadow. And although there is always enough left on the usable side of the gap to carry on living, the more we push over the other side, the bigger the gap and the more the lost self grows. While we are busy learning and creating life for ourselves in those childhood and young adult years, the lost self is often somewhat quiet, although that doesn't have to be the case. The quietness of the lost self in those years is probably occurring for the very same reason the lost self is created in the first place. As we turn any issue felt inwards to solve it via altering ourselves. In this way, the lost self can actually be self-compounding, a self-creating feedback loop whose disallowed presence can force the chasm of the gap between the true self and the lived self even wider. As much as we are deft at busily distracting ourselves, many of us find there comes a time when the lost self can no longer be ignored. As our lives get quieter, the call of the lost self from the gap we created grows more prominent to us. As we get more capable to make everything work, as the once newness of living freely in our worlds of our own creation becomes something we are used to every day, as the stresses of making it work reduce, we can start to hear the lost self calling. And maybe this is why society is structured now to keep us busy, to keep us stressed, to generate a lot of people who continue to struggle in their lives, because this turns down the volume on the lost self. It means it takes longer, maybe even a whole lifetime, before the lost self gets loud enough for us to hear. But we will hear it. The almost universal greatest wish of the dying is that they had lived a life truer to themselves. This effectively is a wish to have heard the lost self and to have acted to find them. So now we know the never lost self before the gap is created or grows. And we know the lost self who, cast aside in the gap, calls to us until we can hear them, until we choose to listen. So who is the lost self found? The lost self found is the you may become by reaching down into the gap and pulling up the lost self, welcoming the lost self to join you in life, and, as this more complete version of you, overcoming the pain of looking back into your own personal shadowlands, building a bridge to cross the gap, and journeying there to recognize or reclaim those parts of you that you had decided were not wanted or not worthy. This journey has a seismic effect on your story of self. It shakes the earth and closes the gap, leaving both sides of you drawn back together, whole, and nothing is lost any longer. The lost self is found. This journey is not easy, but it is the journey of a lifetime. After all, as the deathbed wish of almost 100% of people tells us, it is our one wish at the end to live a life more true to ourselves. So this is the journey we are on, as individuals, as a species, as life itself. And in living a life more true to ourselves, the tragedy of the human condition, that we create and live out our own downfall, is absolved. In fact, all our issues are solved, because it is the friction and pain of the lost self refused that causes all the issues and hate in our world. But that is another story of self for another time. For now, it is enough to have met the never lost self, the lost self, and the lost self found. And to be able to hold the possibility that, because the lost self found has not only been lost, but has been found, in that journey, the lost self found holds a golden wisdom that the never lost self did not know. What is that wisdom, and why should we suffer for it? It is the understanding and connection and true value, true wealth, true worth. In passing through the fire ourselves, we understand the passage of others better, seeing them at once both as on a different journey to us and on a similar one, at once as both separate from us and connected. This helps us to understand each other's journey and to shine a light for others that can reach across to them on their path. Remembering always that we are not on the exact same track, so there's no hierarchy. We reach across to them, not back. The connection between individuals and individual stories is at once what we seek and what we fear. So to foster this connection is to triumph over fear and to be more together. And in that connection, the realization simultaneously of both true uniqueness and true wholeness, we are free to, at once, be both separate and connected, and in that we live radiantly at peace. So where do you feel you are on the journey of a lifetime? Do you resonate more with the never lost self? Do you resonate more with the lost self? Or maybe you resonate more with the lost self found? Which ones have you experienced? And which one are you living as in your daily, day-to-day life? Remembering that it is often not a one and done journey. It may seem you have travelled the path, yet you can still hear the lost self calling when you listen. And you can find the gap, though smaller than the first time you travelled the path. And that gap is not quite closed. The bridge is not quite wide enough or strong enough yet to support some parts of you that still wait in the shadowlands. And you are being asked, maybe, to choose again, to reach at once back to who you were and forward to who you can be. And to take the journey there to free more of you. To find you are greater in every way than you ever dreamed you could be.
We are all telling our stories. And we are all telling ourselves stories about it all. Are you brave enough to walk with me into hearing, considering and understanding the stories we tell? Join me next time, where we'll be considering more stories and illusions and stepping into creating the freedom we desire. Every moment, we are who we are choosing to be. You choose. Choose you. Because your story matters.